My mother and father had only one child, me, and from the moment I could understand words, I sensed that I was meant to fill a void that existed before I was even born. Looking back now, at 28 years old, I can see all the signs that were there from the beginning. But as a child, you don't question the reality your parents create for you. You simply exist within it, trying to earn their love in whatever form they're willing to give it. I was 6 years old when my mother first called me Danny instead of Diana. It was a Tuesday morning. I remember that clearly because we always had pancakes on Tuesday mornings, and she was flipping them at the stove when she turned to me with this strange, distant look in her eyes and said, "Danny, sweetie, come get your breakfast." The name hit me like a physical force, even at that young age. I knew that name. It was the name they whispered sometimes when they thought I was asleep. The name that made my mother cry on certain dates throughout the year. The name of the baby brother who had died before I was born. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe she was tired or distracted. But when I gently said, "Mama, I'm Diana," her face transformed into something I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger exactly, but a kind of desperate sadness that made my little heart race with the need to fix whatever I had broken. "No, sweetie," she said, her voice trembling. "You're my Danny. You've always been my Danny." And in that moment, faced with my mother's pain, I made the choice that would define the next decade of my life. I nodded and sat down to eat my pancakes as Danny. My father was reading his newspaper at the table, and I watched him carefully for any reaction. His knuckles were white as he gripped the paper, and I could see a muscle jumping in his jaw, but he didn't say a word. He just reached over and ruffled my long hair, then cleared his throat and said, "We should probably get you a haircut, son." The word son seemed to stick in his throat, but my mother's face lit up with such joy that I knew this was what they needed from me. That afternoon, my mother took me to my room and began what I now think of as the Great Transformation. She was almost manic in her energy, pulling out all my dresses, my dolls, my pink bedsheets with the little flowers I had picked out just months before for my birthday. "We're going to redecorate," she announced, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "Make it more suitable for a growing boy." I watched as she packed away my Barbie dream house, the one I had spent hours arranging and rearranging, creating elaborate stories for the dolls who lived there. Each toy she removed felt like she was erasing a part of me, but I stayed silent because her hands had stopped shaking for the first time in months. By evening, my room had been completely transformed. Gone were the lavender walls I had begged for, hastily covered with posters of race cars and dinosaurs. My beautiful canopy bed had been replaced with a sturdy wooden frame and dark blue sheets. Spider-Man stared down at me from where my fairy princess poster used to be. My mother stood in the doorway, surveying her work with satisfaction. "Perfect for my little man," she said, and the pride in her voice was something I had been craving my whole short life. If being Danny made her proud, then I would be the best Danny I could be. The haircut came the next day. My mother took me to a barber shop instead of the salon where Miss Julie usually trimmed my ends while I sat in the special princess chair. The barber shop smelled different, like aftershave and something medicinal, and the chairs were big and black instead of pink and sparkly. My mother held my hand tightly as she told the barber, an older man named Frank, who had apparently cut hair in Riverside for 30 years, that her son needed a proper boy's haircut. I can still remember the feeling of all that hair falling away, the weight of it leaving my head as Frank worked his scissors with practiced efficiency. My mother collected some of the fallen strands, tucking them into her purse with reverence, as if they were precious relics. When he spun me around to face the mirror, I didn't recognize the child staring back at me. With my hair cropped short, my face looked different, sharper somehow, more like the son my parents wanted me to be. My mother clapped her hands together, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Danny," she breathed. "You look just like him." School presented a whole new set of challenges. I had been Diana at Madison Elementary since kindergarten. I had friends who knew me, teachers who called me by my name, a whole identity built over my few years of existence. But my mother marched into the principal's office that week with a determination that could have moved mountains. I sat outside while she spoke to Mrs. Henderson, the principal, and I could hear raised voices through the door, though I couldn't make out the words. When they finally emerged, Mrs. Henderson looked confused and concerned, But my mother had that triumphant look she got when she won an argument with my father about money or vacation plans. "The school will be calling you Danny from now on," my mother informed me as we walked to the car. "And you'll be using the boys' bathroom and changing for PE with the boys. It's all arranged." The thought of using the boys' bathroom made my stomach churn with anxiety, but I just nodded. That's what I did now. I nodded and agreed and became whatever version of me would make my parents happiest. The first day as Danny was terrifying. My teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, stumbled over my new name during roll call, looking at me with concern as I raised my hand to claim this identity that wasn't mine. Some of my classmates giggled. Others looked confused. My best friend Emma leaned over and whispered, "Why is she calling you that?" I just shrugged and said this was my name now, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. The boys' bathroom was a foreign territory that smelled like disinfectant and something vaguely unpleasant. I stood outside the door for so long that first time that a teacher asked if I was feeling sick. When I finally worked up the courage to go in, I kept my eyes on the floor, rushed into a stall, and tried to pretend this was normal. The boys who saw me looked confused, but didn't say anything. I think even at 7 and 8 years old, children can sense when something is too complicated for them to understand. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, I learned to inhabit this new identity. I studied the boys in my class like an anthropologist, noting how they walked with their feet wider apart, how they threw balls overhand instead of underhand, how they expressed excitement with shoves and high fives instead of hugs and squeals. I practiced at home in front of my mirror, lowering my voice, changing my posture, becoming Danny in every way I could manage. My parents rewarded every successful performance. When I joined the youth baseball team, my father actually took time off work to come to my first practice. He stood on the sidelines with the other dads, pride evident on his face, as I fumbled with the glove and struggled to hit the ball. It didn't matter that I was terrible at it. What mattered was that his son was playing baseball. My mother brought orange slices and juice boxes to practice, wearing her new baseball mom t-shirt with Danny's mom printed on the back in bold letters. The other boys on the team accepted me with the casual indifference of children. I was just Danny, the kid who couldn't catch but tried really hard. Some of them became my friends, or at least the version of friendship that existed between boys at that age, which mostly consisted of competing over who could burp the loudest and trading Pokemon cards. I learned to appreciate these friendships even as I mourned the loss of the easy intimacy I'd had with Emma and my other girlfriends, who had slowly drifted away as I became more and more entrenched in my Danny persona. My mother documented everything obsessively. She took photos at every game, every practice, every moment that confirmed her narrative of having a son. She created elaborate scrapbooks with titles like Danny's Baseball Journey and Undins, My Little Man Growing Up. She joined online communities for boy moms, sharing stories about Danny's adventures and milestones. I would sometimes catch her scrolling through these forums late at night, commenting on other mothers' posts about their sons with an intensity that seemed desperate, even to my young eyes. The clothes were perhaps the hardest adjustment. Gone were the comfortable leggings and soft cotton dresses I had loved. Instead, I wore cargo shorts that chafed my thighs and t-shirts with aggressive graphics of sharks and monsters. My mother would lay out my clothes each night, creating outfits that screamed boy in the most stereotypical ways possible. Camouflage was a favorite pattern, as were anything with sports logos or superhero emblems. When I complained that the clothes were uncomfortable, she would get that fragile look in her eyes and say, "But Danny loves these clothes, don't you, sweetie?" And I would nod and say yes. I loved them. Birthday parties became exercises in performance art. When I turned 8, my mother threw me a dinosaur-themed party, complete with a massive T-Rex cake and party games that involved roaring contests and fossil digs in the sandbox. I had asked, tentatively, if we could maybe have a small party with just family, but she had already invited my entire baseball team and half the boys in my grade. I spent the party playing the role of the birthday boy who was obsessed with dinosaurs, even though I had never expressed any particular interest in them. But I had become an expert at reading my mother's cues, and I knew that Danny was supposed to love dinosaurs, so I roared and stomped, and pretended to be thrilled with every dinosaur-related gift I received. The gifts themselves were a stark reminder of how completely my identity had been transformed. Where once I might have received art supplies or books about princesses, now I got action figures and Nerf guns and remote control cars. I learned to express appropriate enthusiasm for each one, to play with them when my parents were watching, to display them prominently in my room. But late at night, when everyone was asleep, I would sometimes take out the one doll I had managed to hide, a small cloth doll my grandmother had made for me before she passed away. I would hold it close and whisper to it all the things I couldn't say during the day. Physical activities became a constant source of anxiety. Danny was supposed to be athletic, rough and tumble, fearless. But I was naturally cautious, preferring quiet activities to physical ones. My mother enrolled me in every sport imaginable, searching for the one that would stick. Baseball gave way to soccer, which gave way to basketball, which gave way to football. I was mediocre at all of them, but I tried because trying made my parents happy. My father would give me pep talks about toughening up, about playing through the pain when I got hurt, about being a man. I was 8 years old, but he spoke to me as if I was preparing for battle. The summer between second and third grade, we went on a family camping trip. My mother had decided that Danny needed to experience the great outdoors, needed to fish and hike and sleep under the stars. She bought all new camping gear, everything in appropriately masculine colors of navy and forest green. As we drove to the campsite, she chattered excitedly about all the father-son bonding activities my dad and I could do. My father gripped the steering wheel and said nothing, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. The camping trip was a disaster that we all pretended was a success. I hated everything about it: the bugs, the dirt, the uncomfortable sleeping bag, the freeze-dried food that tasted like cardboard. But I smiled and helped set up the tent and pretended to be excited about fishing, even though the worms made me want to cry. When we caught a fish, my father showed me how to gut it, and I thought I might throw up right there by the lake. But I swallowed hard and nodded as he explained about being grateful for what nature provides, about how this was what men had done for thousands of years. That night, as we sat around the campfire, my mother took photo after photo of her boys, and I smiled until my face hurt. Third grade brought new challenges. My body was starting to change in subtle ways, and I became hyper-aware of every difference between me and the other boys. I started wearing looser clothes, hunching my shoulders, anything to hide the changes that threatened to expose the truth. My mother must have noticed because she started buying me compression undershirts, telling me they would help with my posture. We both knew what they were really for, but we maintained the fiction that Danny just had bad posture that needed correcting. It was around this time that I discovered the power of anger as a masculine emotion. When I felt like crying, I learned to channel it into anger instead. Anger was acceptable for boys, expected even. So when someone questioned why I threw like a girl or ran differently than the other boys, I would ball up my fists and glare, and they would usually back off. I got into my first fight that year, shoving a boy who had made one too many comments about how I looked. When I got sent to the principal's office, my mother was called in, but instead of being upset, she seemed almost proud. "Boys will be boys," she said to Mrs. Henderson, who looked deeply concerned, but it said nothing. My father's discomfort with the situation became more apparent as I got older. He would sometimes slip and call me Diana, then quickly correct himself with a guilty look at my mother. He started working longer hours, coming home after dinner more often than not. When he was home, he threw himself into the role of teaching his son masculine skills. We built a treehouse in the backyard, though I was terrified of heights. We worked on cars in the garage, though the smell of motor oil made me nauseous. He taught me to throw a spiral with a football, patiently correcting my form over and over until I could manage a decent throw. But there were moments when the facade cracked. Once, when my mother was at her book club, my father found me crying in my room. I had had a particularly hard day at school, struggling to maintain my Danny persona while navigating the increasingly complex social dynamics of elementary school. He sat on my bed, and for a moment, I thought he might acknowledge what we both knew. Instead, he patted my shoulder awkwardly and said, "It gets easier, kiddo. Growing up is hard for everyone." Then he left, and I heard him in his study, the clink of ice in a glass telling me he was pouring himself another whiskey. Fourth grade was when I met Jackson, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe I could make this Danny thing work. Jackson had just moved to Riverside from Seattle, and he didn't know Diana had ever existed. To him, I had always been Danny, had always been a boy, had always belonged in the world I was forced to inhabit. We became best friends quickly, bonding over a shared love of reading, though I had to pretend I preferred adventure stories to the fairy tales I secretly still loved. Jackson was different from the other boys, quieter, more thoughtful. He didn't care that I wasn't good at sports, didn't mock me for preferring art class to PE. With him, being Danny felt almost natural. My mother loved Jackson. Here was proof that Danny could have normal friendships, could be a regular boy with regular boyfriends. She encouraged the friendship with an intensity that sometimes made Jackson's mom, Patricia, raise her eyebrows. But Patricia was new to town, didn't know our history, didn't question why Danny's mom seemed so invested in her son having male friends. The two women became friendly, and I would often go to Jackson's house after school, grateful for the respite from the constant performance required at home. It was at Jackson's house that I first encountered what a different kind of family could look like. Jackson had two sisters, and their house was full of the kind of casual chaos that comes from multiple children with different interests and personalities. His older sister Marie was on the dance team, and sometimes I would watch her practice in their living room, mesmerized by the grace and beauty of her movements. When she caught me watching once, instead of teasing me, she offered to teach me some steps. For one glorious afternoon, while Jackson was at his piano lesson and Patricia was gardening, Marie taught me basic ballet positions. It was the most myself I had felt in years, but I couldn't risk it. When Jackson came home and asked what we had been doing, I laughed and said Marie had been showing me how dancers were actually athletes, how much strength it took. I made it sound like I had been analyzing the athletic aspect rather than longing to join in. Jackson, sweet oblivious Jackson, just nodded and asked if I wanted to play video games. Marie gave me a long look but said nothing, and I was grateful for her discretion. The holiday season was always particularly difficult. My mother would go overboard buying Danny presents, filling the space under the tree with boxes wrapped in masculine paper featuring trucks or sports equipment or superheroes. Each gift was another reminder of who I was supposed to be. One Christmas, my Aunt Susan, my father's sister, gave me a gift wrapped in neutral yellow paper. When I opened it, I found a beautiful leather-bound journal. "For your thoughts," she said simply, meeting my eyes with a look I couldn't quite decipher. My mother quickly interjected that it was perfect for Danny to record his baseball stats, but Aunt Susan just smiled and said it was for whatever I wanted to use it for. That journal became my lifeline. Late at night, by flashlight under my covers, I would write the truth. I wrote about being Diana, about the dresses I missed, about the confusion and pain of living as someone I wasn't. I wrote about the dreams where I was myself, where my parents loved Diana as much as they loved Danny. I hid the journal inside an old shoebox in the back of my closet, buried under Danny's outgrown clothes. It was dangerous to keep it, but I needed somewhere to exist as myself, even if it was only on paper. Fifth grade brought the dreaded health education classes, where boys and girls were separated to learn about their changing bodies. I sat with the boys, my heart pounding, as the teacher discussed things that would never apply to the body I actually had. When he talked about voice changes, I practiced lowering my voice even more, trying to stay ahead of questions about why Danny's voice wasn't cracking like the other boys. The other boys joked and laughed through the embarrassing parts, but I memorized every word, trying to understand how to better perform this masculinity that was expected of me. My mother, perhaps sensing the increased danger of my changing body exposing our secret, doubled down on her efforts to cement Danny's identity. She signed me up for Boy Scouts, where I learned to tie knots and build fires and recite oaths about honor and duty. She bought books about raising boys and left them conspicuously around the house, titles like Bringing Up Boys and The Wonder of Boys and Boys Adrift. I would catch her reading them intently, highlighting passages, as if she could will me into authentic boyhood through research and determination. The Boy Scout camping trips were exercises in endurance. I shared tents with other boys, always terrified they would notice something different about me. I became expert at changing clothes and sleeping bags, at finding excuses to use the bathroom alone, at maintaining physical distance while still appearing friendly and normal. The other scouts accepted my quirks as just Danny being weird, and I was grateful for the general obliviousness of preteen boys. But there were close calls. Once during a swimming activity at camp, I claimed to have an ear infection to avoid putting on the swim trunks that would have revealed too much. The scoutmaster called my mother to confirm, and I held my breath waiting to see if she would maintain the lie. She did, driving 2 hours to pick me up early from camp, her face tight with an emotion I couldn't name. On the drive home, she said nothing for the first hour, then suddenly pulled over and gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles went white. "You have to be more careful," she said, her voice low and intense. "Danny can't have people asking questions." I nodded, ashamed that I had almost exposed our secret, even though the secret itself was eating me alive. 6th grade meant middle school, and middle school meant changing for PE in locker rooms. My mother had already met with the school administrators, armed with a doctor's note about a fictional skin condition that required privacy. I was assigned a special changing area, a small closet-like room that had probably been a storage space. The other kids called it Danny's special room and made jokes about why I needed it, but it was better than the alternative. I changed quickly. In that small space, surrounded by old equipment and the smell of rubber and dust. Grateful for the privacy, even as it marked me as different. It was in middle school that I first heard the word transgender, whispered as a joke between boys who didn't really understand what they were saying. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, forced to live as the wrong gender, while out in the world, there were people fighting for the right to live as their true selves. But I couldn't claim that identity either, because I wasn't transgender. I was a girl being forced to live as a boy, a different kind of wrong that didn't have a name or a community or a flag. The social dynamics of middle school were brutal. Boys were expected to start noticing girls, to have crushes, to talk about who was hot and who wasn't. I learned to participate in these conversations, picking a girl to have a fake crush on, usually someone safely unattainable, like a celebrity or an 8th grader who would never notice a 6th grade boy. When the other boys talked about girls' bodies in ways that made me uncomfortable, I would laugh along while feeling sick inside. This was what boys did, apparently, and I was supposed to be a boy. My period started the summer before 7th grade. I woke up to blood and pain, and the horrible realization that my body was betraying our secret in a way that couldn't be hidden or explained away. I stuffed my underwear with toilet paper and tried to clean up the evidence, but my mother must have noticed something because she appeared in my doorway with a strange, sad look on her face. "Come with me," she said quietly, and I followed her to her bathroom, where she wordlessly handed me supplies and showed me what to do. We didn't talk about it. We couldn't talk about it because talking about it would mean acknowledging that Danny wasn't real. Managing my period while maintaining my boy identity required a level of subterfuge that was exhausting. I became paranoid about accidents, about smells, about anyone noticing anything different. I wore dark pants always, carried a backpack even when the other boys made fun of me for it, and became expert at predicting when I would need to make emergency bathroom trips. My mother kept me supplied with what I needed, leaving packages in my room without comment, and we maintained our mutual silence on the subject. 7th grade was also when I met Sophia. She transferred to our school in October, and something about her immediately drew my attention. She was confident in a way I had never seen in a girl our age, comfortable with herself, uninterested in fitting into the boxes middle school tried to put people in. She wore what she wanted, said what she thought, and didn't seem to care if people liked her or not. I was fascinated and terrified by her in equal measure. Sophia decided we were friends before I had a chance to maintain my usual careful distance from girls. She sat next to me in English class and started talking to me about the book we were reading, completely unfazed by my monosyllabic responses. She had opinions about everything and wasn't shy about sharing them. When she found out I liked to read, she started bringing me book recommendations, slipping them to me between classes with a conspiratorial grin. "You're different from the other boys," she told me one day at lunch, and my heart stopped. But then she continued, "You actually think about things. You're not just all sports and video games and stupid jokes." I relaxed slightly, but her attention still made me nervous. Sophia saw things, noticed things that others missed. I could tell by the way she watched people, cataloging information, making connections. Being her friend felt dangerous, but I couldn't seem to help myself. My mother did not like Sophia. She would purse her lips whenever I mentioned her, make comments about how Danny should be spending time with his boyfriends. When Sophia called the house one evening to ask about a homework assignment, my mother told her I was busy and hung up quickly. Boys and girls can't really be friends at this age, she told me afterward. People will get the wrong idea about Danny. But Sophia wasn't easily deterred, and she continued to seek out my friendship with a persistence that both thrilled and alarmed me. It was Sophia who first made me question whether I could keep living this lie. We were working on a group project at her house, and her mother had made us snacks. As we sat at their kitchen table, Sophia's mom asked about my interests, my family, normal parent questions. But something about the way she asked, with genuine interest and warmth, made me want to tell her everything. I didn't, of course, but for the first time, I imagined what it would be like to stop being Danny, to tell someone the truth. Your mom seems intense, Sophia said after I had called home to check in, my mother's voice audible through the phone demanding to know who else was there and when I would be home. I shrugged, my standard response to any observation about my family. But Sophia wasn't satisfied with that. It's like she's afraid of losing you or something, she continued, and the accuracy of her observation made my chest tight with unexpressed emotion. The spring of 7th grade brought a new crisis. The school was organizing a 3-day science camp trip, with students sleeping in cabins separated by gender. There would be no private spaces, no way to maintain the careful boundaries I had constructed. My mother tried to get me excused from the trip, citing various concerns, but the school pushed back. This was a required educational experience, they said. All students were expected to attend. I watched my mother's face cycle through emotions as she realized she couldn't protect our secret from this without raising more questions. In the end, I faked a severe stomach flu the day before the trip. I made myself throw up by drinking salt water, stayed in the bathroom moaning dramatically, and my mother played along, calling the school with concern in her voice. My father watched from the doorway as I performed illness, and I saw something in his expression that looked like grief. But he said nothing, just closed the door and left me to my misery. While my classmates were at science camp, I spent 3 days in my room, supposedly recovering, but really writing in my journal. I filled pages and pages with the life I wished I had, the person I wanted to be. I wrote about wearing dresses again, about painting my nails, about being called Diana. I wrote about having friends who knew the real me, about not having to lie every moment of every day. When I heard my mother coming up the stairs, I quickly hid the journal and grabbed a book about baseball that I kept for show. Jackson noticed I was struggling when everyone returned from camp. He had stories about late-night talks in the cabin, about pranks and games, and the kind of bonding experiences I had missed out on. But instead of making me feel worse, he seemed to understand that something deeper was wrong. "You know you can talk to me, right?" he said one day as we walked home from school. "About whatever." The kindness in his voice almost broke me, but I just nodded and changed the subject to safer ground. 8th grade brought new physical challenges. My body was betraying me in ways that became harder to hide. My mother bought me larger and larger compression shirts, but they could only do so much. I wore layers even in warm weather, claiming to always be cold. I developed a hunched posture that my father tried to correct with constant reminders to stand up straight, not understanding that I was trying to minimize my profile, to take up less space, to hide in plain sight. The depression hit me that year like a weight I couldn't shake off. It became harder to maintain the energy required for my constant performance. My grades started slipping because I couldn't concentrate, couldn't care about algebra when my entire existence was a lie. My mother noticed and redoubled her efforts to reinforce Danny's identity, as if the problem was that I wasn't being boy enough, rather than that I was dying inside from being a boy at all. She signed me up for more activities, trying to find something that would stick, that would make Danny real. Wrestling, hockey, computer club, robotics team. I drifted through them all like a ghost, present in body but absent in spirit. The coaches and advisors would pull my parents aside with concerns. Danny seemed disconnected, they would say. Danny didn't seem interested. Danny was there, but not really there. My parents would nod and promise to talk to me, but the talks were always about trying harder, about committing more fully to whatever activity we were discussing. It was Aunt Susan who finally saw through it all. She came for Thanksgiving that year, and I could feel her watching me throughout dinner as I sat in my uncomfortable button-down shirt and talked about football with my father and male cousins. After dinner, she found me in the kitchen, supposedly helping with dishes, but really just trying to find a moment alone. "How are you, really?" she asked, and something in her tone made me look up sharply. She was studying me with those intelligent eyes that had always seen too much. "I'm fine," I said automatically, but she shook her head. "No, you're not, and I think I know why." My heart pounded as she moved closer, lowering her voice. "I remember Diana," she said simply. "I remember the little girl in the purple dress who loved butterflies." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I must have swayed because she steadied me with a hand on my shoulder. "I don't know why they're doing this to you," she continued, "but I want you to know that I see you. The real you." I broke down completely, sobbing in my aunt's arms in a way I hadn't allowed myself to cry in years. She held me tight, murmuring comforting words, telling me it wasn't my fault, that none of this was my fault. When I finally calmed down enough to speak, I begged her not to say anything to my parents. The fear in my voice must have convinced her because she agreed, though I could see it pained her to do so. Before she left that weekend, Aunt Susan slipped me a card with her phone number and email address. "If you ever need anything," she said, "anything at all, you call me, day or night." It was the first lifeline I'd been thrown in 8 years of drowning, and I clutched it like the treasure it was, just knowing that someone knew, that someone saw Diana instead of just Danny, made the burden a tiny bit lighter to bear. The rest of 8th grade passed in a blur of maintained facades and stolen moments of truth. I emailed Aunt Susan from the library computer, careful to delete all traces afterward. She responded with love and support, never pushing me to take action I wasn't ready for, just reminding me that I deserved to live as myself. She sent me articles about strong women, about identity, about finding yourself. I read them hungrily, then deleted the emails to keep them safe from discovery. High school loomed on the horizon, like both a threat and a promise. A bigger school meant more chances to hide, but also more people to fool. My mother was already planning Danny's high school experience, researching which sports teams to try out for, which clubs would look good on college applications for her son. She had 4 years all mapped out, not knowing that I was counting down the days until I turned 18 and could finally stop pretending. The summer before 9th grade was particularly difficult. My body had developed in ways that no amount of compression clothing could fully hide. My mother took me shopping for Danny's high school wardrobe, selecting the baggiest clothes she could find, while maintaining the pretense that this was just Danny's style. I stood in fitting room after fitting room, looking at myself in mirrors and seeing a stranger looking back. The disconnect between who I was and who I appeared to be had never been sharper. It was during one of these shopping trips that we ran into Mrs. Martinez, my 3rd grade teacher. She did a double take when she saw me, clearly not recognizing the teenager in front of her as the same child she had taught. My mother jumped in quickly with false cheerfulness, reintroducing me as Danny, talking about how much I'd grown. Mrs. Martinez smiled politely, but I caught the confusion in her eyes, the moment of disconnect as she tried to reconcile her memories with what she was seeing. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't do 4 more years of this. I sat down with my journal and wrote a letter to my parents, pouring out 8 years of pain and confusion and forced identity. I wrote about being Diana, about wanting to be myself, about how their love for Danny was killing the person I actually was. I sealed it in an envelope and hid it in my backpack, waiting for the right moment to deliver it. The right moment came sooner than expected. It was a week before school started, and my mother was in full preparation mode. She had laid out 5 different first-day outfit options for Danny, all variations on the same theme of aggressive masculinity. She was talking about which girls Danny might want to ask to homecoming, about which sports would give him the best chance at making varsity eventually. My father sat in his chair, nursing his evening whiskey, saying nothing but looking increasingly uncomfortable with each plan my mother outlined. Something in me snapped. I stood up, my legs shaky but my resolve firm, and said, "I can't do this anymore." My mother stopped mid-sentence, looking at me with confusion. "Do what, sweetie?" she asked, and the casual way she dismissed my obvious distress made my anger flare. "This," I said, gesturing at the clothes, at myself, at the whole elaborate construction of Danny. "I can't be Danny anymore. I won't." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went through a series of expressions, confusion to understanding to something that looked like panic. "Don't be silly," she said, her voice artificially light. "You are Danny. You've always been Danny." But I was done with the gaslighting, done with pretending her reality was mine. "No," I said, louder this time. "I'm Diana. I've always been Diana. You just decided I should be Danny instead." My father set down his glass with a harsh clink. "Stop it," he said, his voice low and warning. But I was beyond stopping. 8 years of suppressed truth came pouring out. I told them about the journal, about crying myself to sleep, about hating every moment of my false existence. I told them about the girls' bathrooms I couldn't use, the clothes I couldn't wear, the person I couldn't be. I told them about living in constant fear of discovery, of disappointing them, of losing their love if I couldn't be the son they wanted. My mother started crying, but they weren't tears of understanding or remorse. They were angry tears, desperate tears. "How can you do this to me?" she wailed. "After everything I've done for you? I gave you a better life, a easier life. Boys have it so much easier, and I protected you from all the pain of being a girl in this world." The twisted logic of her words made my head spin. She genuinely believed she had been protecting me, that forcing me to live a lie was somehow an act of love. "You did it for Danny," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Your dead son, the one who was never born. You've been trying to raise him through me, but he's not here. He was never here. I'm here, and I'm Diana, and I need you to see me." The truth hung in the air between us like a physical presence. My father's face had gone pale, and he looked between my mother and me like he was seeing us both clearly for the first time. My mother's reaction was volcanic. She screamed that I was killing her baby all over again, that I was selfish and cruel and ungrateful. She grabbed the clothes she had laid out and started ripping them, as if destroying Danny's wardrobe could somehow keep him alive. My father tried to calm her, but she turned on him with fury, accusing him of never really accepting Danny, of undermining her efforts to give their son the life he deserved. I ran to my room and grabbed the emergency bag I had started keeping packed, just clothes and my journal and the card from Aunt Susan. As my parents' fight escalated downstairs, I called my aunt with shaking hands. "I need you," I said when she answered, and she immediately understood. "I'm on my way," she said. "Go to the park on Maple Street. I'll meet you there." I slipped out the back door as my mother's screams echoed through the house, running through the darkness toward whatever came next. The park was empty and eerily quiet after the chaos of home. I sat on a swing, the same swing where my mother had pushed Danny years ago, while Diana watched from inside, waiting to be allowed out. My phone buzzed with increasingly frantic texts from both parents, alternating between demands that I come home immediately and accusations of destroying our family. I turned it off and waited in the darkness. Aunt Susan arrived in less than 2 hours, which meant she must have broken every speed limit between her house and mine. She took one look at me and pulled me into a fierce hug. "You're safe now," she murmured into my hair. "We're going to figure this out." As we drove away from Riverside, away from Danny, and toward whatever Diana's life could be, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 8 years. I felt hope. The next days were a blur of legal consultations and emergency therapy sessions. Aunt Susan had connections through her work as a social worker, and she mobilized them all on my behalf. A lawyer specializing in family law and child welfare took my case. A therapist who worked with identity issues cleared her schedule to see me. The story that emerged through these sessions was even more twisted than I had understood. My mother had experienced a late miscarriage years before I was born. She had been carrying a boy, already named Danny, already loved and planned for. The loss had devastated her in ways my father had never fully addressed. When she became pregnant with me, she was terrified of losing another child, terrified of loving another daughter, only to have her taken away. So she had constructed an elaborate delusion that I was Danny returned to her, that her son had come back in a different body. My father, weak and conflict avoidant by nature, had gone along with it at first to keep my mother stable. He had thought it would be temporary, that she would work through her grief and let me be Diana. But as the years passed and the lie deepened, he became trapped by his own complicity. He couldn't admit what they had done without destroying everything, so he had chosen the path of least resistance, enabling my mother's delusion at the cost of his daughter's identity. The legal battle that followed was exhausting. My parents hired their own lawyer and tried to paint me as a troubled teen going through a rebellious phase. They presented years of photos and documentation of Danny's happy life, trying to prove that I had been a willing participant in what they called a family quirk. They accused Aunt Susan of alienating me from my loving parents, of filling my head with dangerous ideas about gender and identity. But the truth has a way of surfacing, and gradually the evidence mounted. Teachers testified about the abrupt change in my identity in first grade. Medical records showed inconsistencies in how I was registered for different appointments. A forensic psychologist evaluated our family dynamics and delivered a scathing report about the psychological abuse I had endured. My journal, entered into evidence, provided 8 years of documentation of a child forced to live as someone she wasn't. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Jackson's mother, Patricia, came forward with security camera footage from their home. She had noticed things over the years, she said, small things that hadn't quite added up. After hearing about the case, she had reviewed old footage and found multiple instances of me breaking down when I thought I was alone, of practicing Danny's mannerisms in their bathroom mirror, of that day with Marie when I had danced with such joy before forcing myself back into character. The judge's decision was swift and decisive. I was removed from my parents' custody and placed permanently with Aunt Susan. My parents were ordered to undergo extensive therapy before any supervised visitation could be considered. The day the ruling came down, my mother had to be removed from the courtroom in restraints, still screaming about her son, still unable to see the daughter she had erased. Life with Aunt Susan was like learning to breathe after years of suffocation. She helped me legally change my name back to Diana, the name that had always been mine. We went shopping for clothes that I actually wanted to wear. And I cried in the dressing room the first time I put on a dress after 8 years. It was a simple sundress, nothing fancy, but wearing it felt like coming home to myself. High school started a month late for me, but I started it as Diana. Aunt Susan had worked with the administration to ensure all my records were correct, that every teacher knew to call me by my real name. That first day, walking through the doors as myself, was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I had spent so long being Danny that I wasn't entirely sure how to be Diana in public, but slowly, day by day, I learned. I made friends who knew me as Diana from the start, who had no memory of Danny to complicate things. I joined the art club, something Danny never could have done, and discovered I had a talent for painting. I let my hair grow out, watching in the mirror each morning as Diana became more visible and Danny faded away. There were hard days when the trauma of those 8 years felt overwhelming. But there were good days too, more and more of them. Sophia found me on social media 6 months after I left Riverside. Her message was simple. I knew something was different about you. I'm glad you get to be yourself now. We struck up a correspondence that turned into a friendship, that turned into something more. She came to visit during spring break, and seeing her again, being able to be honest with her about everything, felt like another piece of my life clicking into place. My parents tried to reach out several times through the serial lawyer. My mother sent letters that veered between accusing me of killing her son and begging Danny to come home. My father's letters were shorter, full of regret, but also excuses, trying to explain why he had let it happen. I read them all with my therapist, processing the complicated emotions they stirred up. I wasn't ready to forgive them, might never be ready, but I was working on forgiving myself for surviving the only way I knew how. The day I graduated from high school, Aunt Susan sat in the audience with tears streaming down her face as they called out, "Diana Rebecca Sullivan." I had taken her last name. I walked across that stage in my cap and gown, my honors cords earned as myself, not as someone I was pretending to be. Jackson was there too, having driven down with his family to support me. He had been shocked when he learned the truth, but had immediately understood so many things that had never quite made sense about his best friend Danny. I'm in college now, studying psychology with a focus on identity development and childhood trauma. I want to help other kids who are forced to be someone they're not, whether by their parents or society or circumstances beyond their control. My professor doesn't know it, but when she lectures about case studies of identity suppression, she's talking about me. I take notes carefully, understanding the theory behind what I lived through, finding healing in knowledge. I still have nightmares sometimes, dreams where I wake up and I'm Danny again, where the last few years have been the dream and the lie is still my reality. On those nights, I get up and look at myself in the mirror, touching my long hair, seeing Diana looking back at me, reminding myself that I'm free. I keep a photo on my nightstand, one Aunt Susan took of me on my 18th birthday, laughing at something off camera, completely unconsciously myself. It's proof that Diana exists, that she survived, that she gets to live the life that was always meant to be hers. My story has become something of a landmark case in family psychology circles. Papers have been written about the long-term effects of forced identity change, about the resilience of the authentic self. They anonymize the details, but I know they're talking about me. It's strange to see your life reduced to academic language, but if it helps prevent another child from going through what I did, then it's worth it. I haven't spoken to my parents in 3 years. My mother is still in treatment, still struggling to accept that Danny was never real. My father sends cards on my birthday, addressed correctly to Diana now, but I'm not ready to open that door. Maybe someday, when the wounds aren't so fresh, when I'm more secure in my reclaimed identity. Or maybe not. Some things break in ways that can't be fixed, and that's okay too. What I've learned through all of this is that identity isn't something that can be imposed from the outside. You can force a child to perform a role, to wear the clothes and say the words and move through the world as someone they're not. But inside, the true self remains, waiting, enduring, surviving until it's safe to emerge. I was Diana even when everyone called me Danny. I was a girl even when I wore boys' clothes and played boys' sports and used boys' bathrooms. The truth of who we are lives deeper than any performance we're forced to give. I think about the other children out there living as someone they're not, whether because of parental delusion, like mine, or societal pressure, or fear, or survival. I want them to know that it gets better, that there is life after the lie, that someday they too can walk through the world as themselves. It's not easy, and the scars remain, but freedom is worth every difficult step it takes to get there. Sometimes I run into people from Riverside when I'm home visiting Aunt Susan. Some recognize me, doing double takes as they try to figure out why I look familiar. Others walk right past, unable to reconcile the young woman they see with their memories of a Danny. When they do recognize me and ask questions, I tell them the truth, simply and without shame. I am Diana. I have always been Diana. I survived being someone else for 8 years, but I never stopped being myself. The last time I saw my mother was from a distance, at a grocery store in Riverside. She was buying the same brands she always bought, moving through her routine as if nothing had changed. She looked older, grayer, diminished somehow. For a moment, our eyes met across the produce section. I saw recognition flash across her face, saw her mouth form a name I couldn't hear from that distance. I don't know if she said Diana or Danny. I turned and walked away before I could find out. I graduate from college next year, and Aunt Susan is already planning the celebration. She jokes that she's making up for all the milestones she missed, all the moments that were stolen from both of us. I'll walk across that stage as Diana Rebecca Sullivan, summa cum laude, ready to start graduate school and continue my journey toward helping others. It's a future I couldn't have imagined during those dark years as Danny, but it's mine, earned through pain, but also through courage and the support of those who saw me for who I really was. My therapist says I'm remarkably well-adjusted for someone who experienced what I did, but I think survival creates its own form of strength. When you spend years holding onto your true self, despite everyone telling you it doesn't exist, you develop an unshakable core of identity. I know who I am now in a way that people who've never had to fight for their identity might not understand. I am Diana. I've always been Diana, and no one will ever take that away from me again. Looking back, I can see the moments where things might have been different. If a teacher had pushed harder when my name suddenly changed, if my father had found the courage to stand up to my mother's delusion, if anyone in our community had questioned why Diana disappeared and Danny took her place. But trauma makes people complicit in ways they don't expect. It's easier to go along with a comfortable lie than to confront an uncomfortable truth. I don't forgive my parents, not yet, maybe not ever, but I understand them better now. My mother, broken by loss, creating an elaborate fantasy to avoid processing her grief. My father, weak and afraid, choosing enabling over conflict. They were adults who should have protected me, who should have put my well-being above their own comfort and delusions. They failed in the most fundamental responsibility of parenthood, which is to see and love your child for who they actually are. But from their failure, I learned my own strength. From their inability to see me, I learned to see myself clearly. From their conditional love based on performance, I learned to love myself unconditionally. These are painful lessons for a child to learn, but they've made me who I am today. A survivor, a fighter. A woman who knows exactly who she is because she had to fight so hard to be allowed to be her. The journal I kept all those years sits in a safety deposit box now. Sometimes I take it out and read entries, marveling at the child who wrote them, who found a way to keep Diana alive when everything in her world was trying to erase her. Those pages hold the truth that everyone else was too afraid or too deluded to see. They're proof that even in the darkest circumstances, the authentic self finds a way to survive. I've started writing again, not in secret journals hidden in shoeboxes, but openly, honestly, sharing my story with the world. It's terrifying to be so visible after years of hiding, but it's also liberating. Every time I write I am Diana, it feels like reclaiming another piece of myself. Every time someone reads my story and recognizes something of their own experience, it makes those 8 lost years mean something. There are still triggers that can transport me back to being Danny. The smell of the aftershave from Frank's barbershop, the sound of a baseball hitting a glove, certain shades of blue that remind me of all those boys' clothes I was forced to wear. In those moments, I have to ground myself in the present, remind myself that I'm safe, that I'm Diana, that no one can force me to be anyone else ever again. Aunt Susan has become more than just my guardian. She's become the mother I should have had all along. She sees me, the real me, and loves me not in spite of who I am, but because of who I am. We've built a relationship based on truth and respect and unconditional acceptance. She's teaching me that this is what family should be, what love should look like, without conditions or performance or pretense. I think about the future a lot now, something I couldn't do when I was trapped being Danny. Then, I could only think about surviving each day, maintaining the performance for another 24 hours. Now I can dream, plan, imagine a life stretching out before me, full of possibilities. I want to get married someday, maybe have children of my own. And if I do, I promise them this. I will see them for exactly who they are, love them for exactly who they are, and never force them to be anyone but themselves. The other day, I got an email from Jackson. He's in college too, now, studying engineering, living his own truth without the complications that shadowed our friendship. He thanked me for being his friend all those years, even when being Danny made real friendship almost impossible. He said he understood now why I had seemed so sad sometimes, why I had held myself apart even when we were close. His acceptance, even retroactively, helps heal something in me. Recovery isn't linear. There are good days when I feel completely myself, confident in my identity, grateful for my freedom. There are hard days when the weight of those lost years feels crushing, when I mourn the childhood I should have had. But even the hard days are mine to feel as myself, and there's a victory in that. I'm allowed to be sad as Diana, angry as Diana, joyful as Diana. All my emotions are finally attached to my real self. I've learned that trauma doesn't define you, but it does shape you. Those 8 years of being Danny will always be part of my story, but they're not the whole story. They're the chapter where the heroine is trapped, but not the ending. The ending is still being written, and I'm the one holding the pen now. I get to decide what comes next, who Diana becomes, what kind of life she builds from the ruins of Danny's false existence. Sometimes people ask if I hate my parents. It's a complicated question. I hate what they did to me. I hate the years they stole. the identity they tried to erase, the pain they caused in the name of their own delusions and weakness. But hate takes energy I'd rather spend on healing and building my new life. They're in my past now, part of the story of who I was forced to be. I'm focused on the present and future of who I choose to be. The name Diana means divine, and sometimes I think about the irony of that. My parents tried to play God with my identity, to remake me in the image of their lost son. But the divine part of me, the essential core of who I was, survived their attempts at transformation. There's something sacred about identity, about the true self that persists despite every attempt to suppress or deny it. They couldn't kill Diana, no matter how hard they tried to bury her under Danny. I'm telling this story not for sympathy or attention, but for all the Dianas out there living as Dannys, all the children forced to be someone they're not to satisfy their parents' needs or delusions or fears. You are real. Your true self is valid and valuable and worth fighting for. It might take years, and the journey might be painful, but you deserve to live as yourself. You deserve to hear your real name, wear clothes that feel right, exist in the world as the person you actually are. The last entry in my hidden journal, written the night before I finally broke free, was simple. I am Diana. I have always been Diana. Someday, everyone will know it. That someday has come. I am Diana, living openly, honestly, freely. The girl who was buried for 8 years has risen, and she's not hiding anymore. She's here, she's real, and she's finally, fully, completely herself, and that, after everything, is its own kind of miracle.